Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into the shadowy stone halls of a medieval convent where candlelight flickers on worn wooden beams. The air carries the scent of herbs and yeast, and somewhere in the distance, a giant cauldron bubbles gently with beer. Yes, really, you're not in a tavern, you're in a place of prayer discipline and sacred brewing. You're barefoot padding along smooth flagstone floors cooled by centuries of use. The walls are thick, the windows small, and outside the wind rustles the herb garden, where someone's just plucked a sprig of yarrow. A group of nuns passes by in saffron and slate-gray habits, murmuring the last line of Vespers. One of them nods at you with the subtle exhaustion of someone who's already been up for 16 hours. She smells faintly of smoked barley mash and devotion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the mix of cities and sleepy towns that show up in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a small adjoining room and your eyes land on the centerpiece, a massive copper kettle, blackened from years of fire, crowned with a wooden lid and tiny puffs of steam. It looks like a witch's cauldron, except it's guarded not by a cackling sorceress, but Sister Margaret, round-cheeked, sharp-eyed, and armed with a wooden paddle longer than your leg. She's been stirring that kettle for an hour, humming the tune of a Latin hymn you don't quite recognize. The convent is quiet now, but it won't be for long. Tomorrow's a festival day, which means extra brewing, extra mouths to feed, and inevitably extra chores. You offer to help, and Margaret hands you a bucket of grain with a knowing grin. It's heavier than it looks, and you slosh just a little on the floor. No worries, this floor's had centuries of slosh. You're not the first sleepy soul to spill. Historians still argue whether the nuns saw brewing as holy work or just household drudgery, but in truth it was probably both. In an age where water could kill you and beer could save your life, the act of brewing was just as sacred as any psalm. Beer was nourishment. It was medicine. It was the warm, hoppy heartbeat of the cloister. Margaret explains that this isn't the strong stuff reserved for guests or celebration. No, this is what's called small beer, barely alcoholic, loaded with calories, and mild enough that even toddlers could knock back a cup without consequence. You blink. Even kids. She just nods and ladles some into a wooden mug. The taste is earthy, barely fizzy, and sort of oaty. You've had worse. As you sip, a younger novice runs in with a basket of dried herbs. Sweet Gale sage and a pinch of rosemary, she says, placing them reverently near the kettle. You raise an eyebrow and Margaret chuckles. No hops today. The garden's picked clean. Back then, hops weren't yet universal. Many brewers used a mix called Brewed, a fragrant blend of whatever the garden or forest could offer. Some historians say this gave nun-brewed beer its distinct, almost floral character. You hear bells toll in the distance. Time to switch shifts. Sister Margareta claps her flour-dusted hands and beckons you toward the next room, where cooled beer is stored in enormous clay jugs stacked against the walls like sleepy giants. One has cracked. Too dry this season, she mutters. You gently run your fingers over its jagged edge. It's cool to the touch and smells faintly of yeast. You feel strangely at peace here among the fermentation and the faith. A quiet joke circulates the convent kitchens. Jesus turned water into wine, but the nuns kept turning water into beer. Not theologically accurate, but it gets a tired chuckle every time. As the evening deepens, you find yourself sitting on a three-legged stool, watching the fire die down beneath the kettle. The room's golden glow fades into soft amber, and somewhere nearby, another group of sisters begins a chant. Their voices rise like steam low and comforting, woven with centuries of repetition. You close your eyes. The air is warm and damp. Your clothes carry the scent of barley and smoke, and for just a moment, it's easy to forget your phone, your inbox, your thousand to-dos. Here, time bubbles slowly. Tasks repeat. Bread rises, beer ferments, prayers are whispered, and the world turns softly on its wooden spindle. You hear a creak behind you, probably the old door again. But maybe it's the ghost of a brewer from centuries past, checking on their last batch. Don't worry, they'll approve. You wake, or maybe you never really slept still, perched on that creaky stool, arms draped over your knees, head heavy with the warmth of barley steam and flickering embers. A soft knock at the wooden door rouses you fully. It's Sister Beatrix this time, older than Margaret, with deep smile lines and a voice like folded linen. She's come to begin the dawn batch. No alarm clocks here, only the rhythm of sun and fire. You stand to stretch, but she gestures for you to sit again. You watched last night. This morning you'll stir. And with that she places the great paddle in your hands. It's still warm from use. A trail of white flour streaks across your tunic when you grasp it, and you start to realize how physical this work really is. Brewing isn't just contemplative, it's labor. She tosses another log under the kettle and hums something in a strange mix of Latin and Old High German. As the fire catches, the light jumps up the stone walls, chasing away the sleepy blue of pre-dawn. You can almost hear the barley waking up with you, shifting and crackling in the heat. Modern historians often debate whether convent brewing was born of necessity or innovation. Some argue it was merely an extension of traditional domestic labor. Others insist these women were master technicians, understanding fermentation centuries before it was formally studied. Regardless, you're now part of that lineage, sweaty, sore, and just a little proud. Your arms ache by the third stir, and Beatrix cackles kindly. Even the abbess had to learn, she says, handing you a cloth to wipe your brow. You grin, but you're not sure whether to believe her. The abbess looks like she hasn't lifted a barrel in 20 years. Still, the image is charming, a row of nuns, young and old, all huddled over a bubbling vat, debating how many juniper berries is too many. By now, the rest of the convent is slowly waking. You hear chickens squawking in the yard and the soft sweep of straw brooms across stone floors. The morning light filters through tiny windows like liquid gold, pooling across bowls, benches, and baskets. A novice enters carrying freshly drawn water in a wooden bucket, sloshing with every careful step. She tips it into the cooling trough and the room hisses in reply. Beatrix pulls out a small cloth pouch from her apron. Inside, she reveals a curious assortment of brewing oddities: a sprig of woodruff, a nugget of resin, a bit of dried orange peel. You raise an eyebrow. Oh yes, she smiles. Each brewer adds her own charm. She plucks out the peel and tosses it in. This one's for the little ones, a sweeter brew. You're mildly horrified, but she adds barely any spirit left after the boil. It's safer than the river, and she's right. Back then, drinking water straight from the stream was a gamble you'd lose more often than win. Boiling it during the brewing process intentionally or not killed off dangerous microbes. So in effect, the nuns weren't just making beer, they were making life a little safer. There's a short burst of laughter from the hallway, unusual in a place so disciplined. You peek out and spot three sisters giggling over a collapsed dough loaf. Apparently, someone forgot to feed the sourdough starter again. Beatrix waves them off with a bemused sigh. Bread and beer, sisters in failure too. Sisters. You stir again more confidently this time. The scent is different now, richer, deeper, like the brewing has reached its teenage years. You learn that this brew will sit for 3 days cool in jugs, then rest in the cellar beneath the chapel. Cold stone darkness and time will finish what fire and care began. In a moment of quiet, Beatrix tells you a story once a traveling bishop visited and called their beer surprisingly passable. She laughs, but you sense she took it as the highest compliment. Another sister had brewed a batch so strong it knocked out 2 visiting monks. That recipe, Beatrix says with a wink, is now reserved for feast days. You can't help but admire how seamlessly brewing folded into the nun's spiritual life. Every step measured, patient, repetitive, mirrored their daily devotions, and like prayer, brewing required faith. You could follow every step and still get a batch that soured or bloomed mold or exploded in the cool cellar. The line between miracle and mess was very, very thin. Historians still argue whether nuns were truly considered equals to monks in the eyes of the brewing world. The evidence is murky, with some convents famous for their ale and others leaving no record at all. It likely depended on location, leadership, and luck, but one thing is certain: their beer mattered. It was given to pilgrims, traded for supplies, and shared with the poor. Suddenly the room fills with the warm, slow chime of the breakfast bell. Beatrix pulls the paddle from your hands and sets it aside. Time to eat, she says, wiping her hands on her apron. You follow her through a series of narrow halls past shuttered rooms and flickering candles into the refectory. There's a single long table flanked by benches already half filled with nuns in quiet contemplation. Wooden bowls are filled with soft, porridge brown bread, and mugs of, you guessed it, last week's small beer. You sit between Beatrix and a younger sister named Clara, who whispers that she once accidentally used lavender instead of licorice root. Tasted like a nun's bathwater, she whispers, eyes twinkling. You laugh but quietly. This is still sacred space. The abbess is watching. And then you eat. Slowly, gratefully in rhythm with the quiet scrape of spoons and the soft tap of wood on wood. The beer is faintly spiced, almost warming, and just enough to make the aches in your arms seem like someone else's problem. Somewhere outside, birds begin to chirp in the hedges. Another day has started, but inside this stone haven, the rhythm of brewing, praying, and tasting continues, just as it has for generations. After breakfast, you help gather the wooden bowls, and while you fumble awkwardly with a stack of mugs, Sister Clara leans over and whispers, "Come with me. I'll show you something better than porridge." Intrigued, and maybe just a little buzzed from the faint beer, you follow her down a side corridor you hadn't noticed before. This passage is narrower, the light more dim. The air smells mustier, and the walls are lined with niches, some filled with dried herbs, others holding beeswax candles or bundles of straw. The floor dips slightly, leading underground. "Watch your head," Clara says, ducking through an arched stone doorway. You enter the solarium, the heart of the convent's provisions. It's cool here even in summer, and the walls are stacked with crocks, barrels, and jugs. This is where the nuns store not just beer, but preserved vegetables, dried mushrooms, salted fish, and the occasional cask of wine for medicinal purposes. You spot a barrel marked with chalky Latin script and nudge Clara. "That's the strong stuff," she grins. "Only for feast days or when someone gets bitten by a goose." She leads you further in until you reach a tucked-away corner lined with odd-shaped clay jugs sealed with beeswax. "Our library," she says, only half joking. "Each jug is a different brew. Some are years old." You realize with a small shiver that you're surrounded by a timeline of taste. Somewhere in this room, history is not just recorded, it's aging in barrels. Historians still debate the actual recipes medieval nuns used. Very few were written down, and most were passed by memory, taste, and quiet ritual. Some scholars argue they intentionally kept their methods secret to maintain an economic advantage. Others believe literacy and obedience to hierarchy kept most documentation strictly under abbey control. Either way, Clara's library is a living archive. She pulls out one jug with a thick layer of dust and cracks it open. The scent hits you immediately, sharp, fruity, faintly sour. "Cherry ale," she says proudly, "from our orchard harvest last spring." You get one sip. It tastes like vinegar's fancier cousin. Not bad. As you chat, she tells you that beer was often brewed with whatever was available: plums, crab apples, elderflower, even pine shoots. Nothing was wasted. Even the spent grain fed the pigs. And in times of scarcity, beer became both comfort and calorie bomb, rich with carbs and faintly sweet from wild fermentation. You spot a jug with a strange wax symbol like a sun and crescent moon combined. Clara notices and hesitates. That one. Well, some say it was brewed on All Hallows' Eve during an eclipse. Sister Hildegard says it sings if you listen close. You lean in, half expecting a hiss or hum. Nothing. You're not holy enough. She smirks, yet there's something deeply grounding about this place. No glowing machinery, no chrome tanks, just clay wood and patience. Everything here moves slow. Even the dust looks like it took its time settling. You begin to understand why brewing was both a job and a meditation. Each batch was a tiny wager with nature and with God. Suddenly there's a distant clatter. Clara curses under her breath and sets the jug down. Floor's being scrubbed. We'll have wet boots if we stay. You trail behind her back into the daylight. The brightness stings after the cellar, and for a moment you feel like you've stepped through time. You pass a few nuns airing linens, their arms bare in the summer heat, skin browned from work and weather. One stops and waves you over. Want to see the herb beds? Of course you do. You're led around the convent to a walled garden. Raised beds hold neat rows of chamomile, sage, mint, yarrow, and something that looks suspiciously like stinging nettle. Bees hover lazily over lavender, and a small scarecrow wears a crooked wimple made from scraps. It's half charming, half terrifying. This is where we gather our Groot, says the nun, whose name turns out to be Theodora. We brew without hops mostly, too bitter, and the abbess says it stirs worldly thoughts. She smirks but doesn't elaborate. You learn that before hops became common, Groot was the go-to mix for preserving and flavoring beer. It often included mugwort, bog myrtle, horehound, and other herbs that sound like items from a wizard's pantry. Some argue that these ingredients had mild psychoactive effects. Others say that's just folklore born of long nights and strong drink. Historians still argue whether Groot-based beers were actually weaker than hopped ones or simply different in character. Some believe that church authorities resisted hops not for taste, but for economic control. After all, controlling Groot meant controlling the means of brewing. And in a world where beer was safer than water that meant power, you help Theodora cut bundles of lemon balm and comfrey, which will be dried and stored for both beer and balm making. The two are often the same here. What heals your skin can also flavor your brew. Everything is multi-purpose layered sacred. By now your tunic is damp with dew and herb oil. Your fingers are stained green. But you're calmer than you've been in days. There's something about pulling mint from the earth and knowing exactly where it'll end up infused in a jug, poured at tables shared in quiet. On the way back inside, Clara meets you with a raised eyebrow. Still alive? You nod. She nods back. Then you're ready for bottling. Bottling in this case means sealing jugs with wax cork or layers of soaked leather. Not exactly glamorous, but critical. Each jug is handled with care, wiped down with linen, and marked with symbols, initials, or in rare cases, a small saint's charm. Beer wasn't just nourishment, it was an offering, a gift, a prayer in liquid form. You handle one jug and feel the warmth of the clay from the sun. You imagine it being passed to a sick traveler, a hungry child, or a harried priest who needs something to quiet his demons. Brewing, you realize, is less about drink and more about care. That night, back in your small guest chamber, you collapse onto a straw-stuffed mattress head, swimming with scents and stories. Outside, the moon rises behind a lattice of ivy and old stone. And inside you, something ancient stirs something simple, sacred, and just a little yeasty. The next morning, you're awakened not by bells or roosters, but by the smell of boiling grain, warm, malty, and oddly soothing. You sit up slowly, still wearing the tunic they lent you, and find your feet sore from yesterday's garden rounds. Outside your door, a basket holds a small hunk of rye bread and a clay cup of barley tea. Functional, silent, very nun. You chew as you walk, drawn by the smell. It leads you back through the stone corridors to the brew house, though technically it's more like a corner of the kitchen with ambitions. Sister Agnes is already there, stirring what looks like a bubbling porridge in a copper vat. She doesn't look up as she says, "You're late." Then she smiles so you know you're only sort of in trouble. The grain mash called wort is thick and steamy. Agnes motions you closer. Stir it. Always clockwise. Don't ask why. You do as instructed, the wooden paddle creaking gently against the sides. Now counterclockwise. She shrugs. Balance. You learn quickly that brewing here is a matter of rhythm of intuition. The grain must be soaked, mashed, then boiled with herbs, though they call this blessing it. Every motion has a name, a purpose, a pause. It's equal parts science and superstition. They heat the wort using a fire that's carefully managed. We never let it boil hard. Agnes explains. It bruises the brew. You raise an eyebrow. Yes, beer can be bruised, just like people. Don't push it too fast. One nun adds dried yarrow. Another pinches in elderflower. The air becomes medicinal, almost perfumed. You watch as the mixture thickens and darkens, taking on the deep gold of afternoon sun. Someone hums a chant under her breath, barely louder than the hiss of steam. You're not sure if it's for the brew or herself. Maybe both. Historians still argue whether this step, the spicing of the wort, was a precise science or more like witchcraft. Some records show exact weights and measures. Others mention only a handful as the spirit moves. One 14th century manual simply reads, "Stir well and pray for patience." You help pour the steaming wort into a cooling basin made of wood and lined with straw mats. It looks crude but functions like a charm. The convent lacks metal pipes or thermometers, so everything depends on touch taste and decades of muscle memory. Clara returns, hands on hips. You've stirred wort. Congratulations. Now you can clean out the spent grain. This, it turns out, involves a shovel of sour smell and a lot of bending over. Not glamorous, but necessary. The grain once cooked is scraped out and dumped into feed baskets for pigs or compost piles. Nothing is wasted here. You pause for a moment and realize that even the garbage has a purpose. The air smells like earth and yeast like morning bread and drying herbs. It's strangely comforting. You're ankle deep in future pig slop, but your mind is drifting like steam while you work. Agnes tells you a secret: some batches are brewed stronger than others. "Feast day beer," she whispers, enough to give the abbot a blush. These special brews are richer, darker, and often aged longer, sometimes in clay jugs buried beneath the floor to keep cool. You glance down, half expecting to find a hatch. "Not here," she says. "That's the secret cellar. Only the abbess has the key." You raise an eyebrow. She says it's for sacramental reserves. Agnes grins, which is nun code for "don't touch it." Midway through scraping grain, Sister Dorothea walks in with a tray of boiled eggs and coarse salt. "Lunch," she says. "Don't drip wort on it." You sit on a bench near the kitchen hearth and eat slowly, grateful for the simplicity. Bread, egg, salt. It tastes better than any gastropub brunch you've ever faked excitement over. Between bites, they talk about other convents, how some brew in barrels instead of jugs, how some use rose petals or even smoked malt. You hear about a French abbey that ferments its beer in hollowed-out tree trunks. Still better than the bishop's table wine, Clara jokes. Historians still debate how involved women truly were in the large-scale beer production. Some say they were limited to home-scale brewing, forbidden from running commercial operations. Others point to monastic records and guild petitions that show nuns fighting, sometimes literally, for brewing rights. In one tale, a group of nuns in 1431 allegedly pelted a rival brewer with rotten plums. Not exactly saintly, but effective. After lunch, you're handed a beeswax tablet and stylus. "Mark the brews," Clara says. "Keep track of which is which. You mess this up, we excommunicate you." She's probably kidding, probably. Each batch is dated and labeled with a small symbol: a circle for feast days, a star for healing a fish for fasting. Friendly, i.e. low alcohol, and a triangle for experimental. You notice one jug has all three symbols. Clara sees you staring. Don't drink that one. The last step of the day is watching the fermenting jugs be stored on high shelves near small open windows for airflow. The air is cooler now, and the sunlight slants in through the ancient glass like golden dust. You realize this is a kind of cathedral, not of stone and saints, but of yeast and time. Later that evening, as vespers echo faintly through the corridors, you sit on a low stool in the kitchen, sipping a tiny cup of mild ale meant for evening calm. It's cloudy, gently sour, almost fruity. You breathe it in like it's a lullaby. Somewhere a bell tolls, not for prayer but for bottling. Again. The rhythm never stops, even when the light fades. You look down at the small clay jug in your hands and realize you're holding history, not just of the convent, but of humanity. Beer wasn't just for fun. It was food, medicine, trade, ritual resistance, brewed by mothers, sisters, workers, rebels, preserved by nuns, shared by all. Even kids drank it, albeit a gentler, low-alcohol version. Sometimes called small beer, it was safer than water, and rich in nutrients. Imagine recess with a frothy wooden mug instead of a juice box. Different times. By the time you crawl into bed, your hands smell faintly of malt and elderflower. You dream of clay jugs, flickering torches, and bubbles rising slow as candle smoke. You wake to rain. Not a storm, Not a downpour, just that soft, steady medieval kind that taps on wooden shutters and makes everything smell like moss and warm hay. It's the sort of weather that makes nuns mutter thank you under their breath and scrub floors with extra satisfaction. You, however, are sore and sleepy and already a little damp just from opening the door. Clara greets you with a wool shawl and a basket of damp linens. Laundry, she says flatly. Beer's not all glory. You take the basket and trudge toward the small cloistered courtyard where gray stones and puddles mirror the cloudy sky. Wet chickens eye you suspiciously. Even they seem to resent your presence. But just as you resign yourself to wringing out bedsheets in the drizzle, something magical happens. You get invited to the tasting room. Okay, room is generous. It's a wooden bench in a side hall, dimly lit by beeswax candles with 3 nuns, 5 cups, and a prayerful silence that suggests you're not supposed to smile. But you do. Because today, the batch you stirred yesterday is ready for the first sip. The ale is still cloudy and young, slightly green as they say, but alive with flavor. You catch notes of coriander, dried orange peel, and maybe a hint of... Is that lavender? Agnes tilts her head at you. We experiment. You sip again. It's sourer than you expected, but not unpleasant. Think kombucha meets unsweetened granola bar. Everyone hums their approval. No applause, no high fives. Just tiny nods and one scribbled note in the margin of a wax tablet. Next time, more heat during the mash. That's it. That's the review. This beer isn't just judged by taste, but by purpose. Is it nourishing? Does it calm the belly? Will it last the week? Was it brewed with intention, and finally will the children drink it without making faces? Yes, even kids. Especially kids. In a world where water might kill you and tea was for royalty, low-alcohol beer was basically filtered cereal you could sip. Historians still argue whether small beer for children was a desperate adaptation or a deliberate health choice. Some say it was merely tradition. Others point to letters and church documents insisting it kept infants from evil humors. Regardless, you can't deny it made mornings quieter. As the rain continues, Sister Dorothea hands you a sheaf of parchment filled with doodles, various brewing setups, experimental ingredient lists, even what looks like a duck wearing a crown. Our last novice got bored, she explains. You may add to it. You draw a tiny clay jug with legs, running, away. Perfect, she says. By midday, the brew room smells different. More acidic, like sourdough left too long. A large crock has gone off, as they say. Not dangerous, just wrong. Clara sighs. Oxidized? Too much air. She lets you sniff it. It smells like disappointment and old pears. They don't throw it out. Instead, the batch is reserved for vinegar, or possibly ale soup. A thin, sour porridge made with stale bread herbs and shame. Still better than the bishop's sermons, Dorothea mutters. The abbess herself makes an appearance later. Tall, thin, with eyes like polished slate, and the sort of voice that makes you stand straighter just hearing it. She doesn't drink the ale, she just inspects, asks 2 questions, then glides away like smoke in a corridor. You're not sure if she's pleased or plotting your removal. You spend the afternoon bottling, not with glass too expensive, but with ceramic jugs sealed with wax and marked with sigils drawn in charcoal. You feel like a wizard's assistant labeling potions. Except these potions cause hiccups and mild dancing. You're told that certain batches are sent to nearby villages, gifts during feast days, or bribes during elections. Not that we bribe, Clara says. We just offer joyful encouragement. You wonder how many mayors were chosen based on fruity finish and smooth aftertaste? You ask about money, do the nuns sell beer? Sometimes, says Agnes, but mostly we trade. In return for ale, they get grain-dried fish, fabric, ink, candles, even songbooks. Beer here isn't commerce, it's currency. Brewed value. Historians still debate how extensive these nun-brewed trade networks really were. Some convents kept detailed ledgers showing dozens of monthly transactions. Others left only vague letters mentioning goods rendered in good faith. One curious case from 1422 shows a convent trading ale for a live peacock. No follow-up notes. As the sky darkens, you help Agnes clean the stone floor with pine ash and vinegar. It smells like medieval mouthwash, The repetition is calming rhythmic. You fall into a trance, half scrubbing half, imagining a world where every adult you knew drank beer for breakfast. A soft bell rings again. This one means compline the last prayer of the day. Most of the sisters file into the chapel, but you're allowed to linger by the kitchen fire. Agnes leaves you a mug half full, lukewarm. She nods once and disappears. You cradle the cup in both hands. The brew tonight is different, darker, richer, almost chocolatey if chocolate had ever existed here. It coats your tongue slowly, then fades like candlelight. It's not a feast beer. It's not for guests. This one is for them, the quiet batch, brewed after hours, for prayer, for thought, for grief. They say beer doesn't age well, but this one tastes like time. As you finish the last sip, the rain ends. The silence that follows feels earned, like a good ending to a long book. You feel full but not heavy, tired but not worn. And the last thing you see before heading to bed is that little parchment doodle. Your clay jug with legs now has a friend, a cork, with eyes chasing after it. Someone got bored again. Morning sneaks in slowly, as if unsure it's welcome. The convent is unusually quiet. No chimes, no footsteps, just the soft creak of beams as they settle from the night's cool. You sit up on your straw-stuffed cot, blink at the low stone ceiling, and realize something astonishing. You're alone. No linen to fold, no bucket to carry, no instructions shouted in Latin. It's your day off. Well, not officially. Nuns don't really do days off. But once a month, if you haven't spilled yeast or spoken too loudly during Vespers, you're permitted a silent observation day, which means you follow along, help if asked, but mostly keep your mouth shut and think deeply about sin, soup, or both. So you drift quietly into the refectory, grab a hunk of rye bread the size of your fist, and chew slowly while watching dust motes dance in the slanted sunlight. It's warm today. Bees drone lazily near the windowsill herb pots. The beer barrels rest in their cool stone storage, sweating slightly as if dreaming of rivers. You wander the cloister walk, trailing a finger along the carved sandstone. Each archway frames a different little world kitchen, smoke rising, a novice struggling with embroidery, Sister Dorothea scribbling furiously onto parchment that's already nearly black with ink. Then, like a mirage, you see the solarium. It's a place you've only glimpsed until now, part storeroom, part sacred vault, part medieval mystery box. Permission to enter is rarely granted, and usually only to the cellaress or those with especially neat handwriting. But today, someone left the door ajar. You step in. It's cool and dry, lined with oak shelves, heavy with sealed jugs, sacks of millet, and barley bundles of dried herbs tied with flax thread, and little ivory tokens labeled with looping script. A faint scent of rosemary dust and yeast fills your nose, and there, tucked behind a half-covered chest, sits the brewery's oldest ledger. Thick as a roast goose and bound in cracked leather, it groans when you open it. The ink is faint brown-black, written in the same hand over decades. It's not a recipe book, it's a diary. Sister Matilda, circa 1339. Barley thin this year, added rye and nettle. Brother Peter sneezed for a week. Agnes of Trier. 1351. Plague took 7. Brewed the saint's ale. All survived but Brother Marcus. Elizabeth unknown date dreamt of hops. Not sure what they are. Must ask the Flemish. Each entry is part science, part superstition, part stand-up comedy. One nun claimed her ale kept devils from the privy. Another insisted beer must be stirred exactly 117 times or suffer divine flatness. A third declared that her brew sang hymns if poured correctly. Historians still argue whether these brewers truly believed in ale miracles or were just bored and poetic. One theory suggests the convents invented such tales deliberately to keep male monks from meddling with their brewing secrets. You copy one line into your palm with charcoal. It reads, "ALA is the prayer of barley." You don't know what it means, but you say it under your breath and feel wiser. Later that afternoon, the abbess appears again silent, gliding with a small wooden box in her hands. She gestures for you to follow, and before you can ask why, she leads you behind the apothecary chamber, down a narrow stair into what must be the oldest part of the convent. The air is still. Dust hangs in beams of light like ancient parchment. Inside the box hops, not dried, not powdered fresh. Green and resinous, smelling like pine needles and citrus. You blink at them. These are rare, imported, expensive, holy even. For the feast, the abbess says, and nothing more. You're told to prepare a new batch half. Barley, half wheat boil. Longer, add the hops last. Clara mutters that this brew will taste like a garden wrestling a loaf of bread, but she says it with pride. This batch matters. It's for guests for celebration. It needs to sparkle without sugar comfort, without sweetness. Beer as diplomacy, and it isn't easy. The boil must be watched like a toddler near a candle. If you stir too late, you lose clarity. Too early, and bitterness overwhelms everything. Patience, Agnes says, and no singing. It upsets the hops. You don't believe her, but you stop humming anyway. Evening comes quickly in the stone-bellied brew room. The mixture darkens to amber, and the scent evolves no longer grassy, but sharp, almost peppery. It coats your throat and lingers. You wonder if medieval judges at ale competitions ever cried from sheer pride. When it's time to cool, you carry heavy clay crocks outside to the shady courtyard, placing them carefully under linen sheets to avoid dust and bugs. A hedgehog waddles nearby. You salute it solemnly. The moon rises. Stars peek between clouds. You're sore and sticky and profoundly proud. This is the best you've done. You don't need a review. The steam, the shimmer, the silence of your fellow brewer says enough. And just before bed, you pass the abbess in the hall. She doesn't stop, doesn't smile, but you swear her mouth twitches slightly upward. Maybe, or maybe that's just the hops talking. By now, your fingers are permanently dusted with flour and grain. Your sleeves bear faint hop stains, and your breath smells faintly of wort. No matter how much mint you chew from the garden, you've entered the phase of brewing where things get quiet. Fermentation isn't loud or flashy. It's a long, slow magic closer to prayer than potion making. You and the others have transferred the warm wort into tall, narrow barrels, tucked away in a cool stone corner of the brewery. You cover each with linen and whisper a blessing just in case. And now you wait. Some days there's nothing to do but watch the barrels and daydream. You sit in the gloom chin, resting on your palm as a tiny hiss escapes one of the crocks. A good sign. The yeast scooped from the last batch and kept in a wooden bowl like sacred treasure has done its job. The sugars turn slowly into alcohol. The frothy head rises and recedes. The room smells like apples bread and a faint whiff of horse blanket. Strangely comforting. To pass the time, Clara tells you about beer stones, crusty, sparkling mineral deposits that form on old brewery walls. Some nuns say they're a sign of divine approval. Others just try to scrape them off before the abbess sees. Historians still argue whether these formations were cleaned for hygiene or preserved for their supposed blessing. You help tally the barrels with little wooden tokens, each marked with a scratched-in symbol. A circle for plain ale, a triangle for spiced, and a crude cat drawing for one that tastes oddly like sage and regret. You suspect that batch was Sister Hildegard's doing, and just as you begin to worry the beer has gone too quiet, you notice something. The yeast has settled, the bubbling slowed, and the surface of the liquid gleams like amber glass. It's time to taste. The first sip always happens in silence. You dip a ladle carved from elderwood, take a cautious mouthful, and close your eyes. The flavor rolls across your tongue, bitter at first, then malty, then a soft herbal finish that tastes faintly of rosemary and thyme itself. You smile. Clara burps. The abbess samples it, later nods once and writes sufficient on a slate. You've never felt prouder of a 6-letter word? Now comes the blessing ceremony. You clean the brewery until the floor could host surgery-arranged linen banners with faded embroidery, wheat sheaves, chalices, small golden fish. The chapel is readied with candles, incense, and a large ceramic jug of the best brew. Beer as body, the abbess says. Not quite doctrine, but close. Everyone gathers for Compline, the final prayers of the day. The bell tolls gently as twilight softens the stone walls. The youngest novices light the candles. The abbess lifts the jug of fresh beer, not wine, not water, and blesses it with a psalm. It's poured into tiny cups carved from horn and passed down the row. You sip reverently. The beer is cool, bright, slightly fizzy, and somehow more than it was before. You feel its warmth settle in your chest like a quiet fire. Then the real miracle happens. The infirmarian appears with her rolling cart bread, thick soup, fresh apples, and tiny seed cakes that crumble if you breathe on them. Feast night, she whispers. Don't drop the cakes. You eat until your belly hums. Then, in the darkening courtyard, the older nuns begin to sing. No hymn, just a soft lullaby in a dialect you don't quite understand. It weaves through the fig trees and swirls above the barrels like smoke. And just as you begin to drift, Sister Agnes tells a story of how beer once saved the convent. Long ago, she says, though no one knows how long a sickness swept through the nearby town. Children coughed, old men collapsed, and even goats wandered like they'd forgotten how to goat. Water made it worse. Wine was too dear. The villagers came to the convent, desperate and afraid. So the abbess ordered the brewery opened. Every jug, every crock, every damp barrel was given freely. Mothers filled buckets. Children drank from the spigot. They survived. Not all, but many. Enough to sing about. And not just any ale, Agnes says. The blue label batch. There's no label now, just a small faded tile near the chapel well. But you wonder, did the beer truly heal them? Was it the boiling that saved them, or the love with which it was stirred? Historians still argue whether monastic beer truly reduced disease rates or simply offered a cleaner hydration option than local wells. But you decide to believe it was a little of both, and maybe a little bit of magic. That night, you sleep beneath the stars, a blanket wrapped tight around your shoulders, the scent of bread and barley in your hair. You dream of bubbles rising slowly in a wooden barrel, and somewhere in the background, the abbess smiles not at you exactly, but through you as if she's proud of something only she can see. It's early morning now, just before Lauds the sunrise prayers, and the convent feels like it's holding its breath. The kitchen clatters faintly, the cloister birds begin their bickering, and somewhere near the herb garden someone is already chopping parsley. But you're headed to the storeroom, because it's time to move the beer. The fermentation is finished, and now the ale must be carefully transferred into sealed storage vessels. This isn't some casual pour and pray task. This is a delicate, serious process involving siphoning tubes made of reed or boiled goat gut, depending on the abbess's mood barrels that creak like old knees and more spilled beer than anyone dares admit. You and Sister Margaret work together, crouched low to avoid disturbing the sediment. She teaches you to listen. The gurgle means the tube is pulling too fast. The silence might mean a clog, or worse, a mouse. You learn to balance a full clay jug on your hip like a baby, to knot linen tightly over each spout, and to label everything with a charcoal-smudged thumbprint. Even the abbess has her own print 3 vertical lines and a dot. At one point, Margaret tells you about the angels portion, a small, unexplained loss from every barrel. Some say it's evaporation. Others say the saints get thirsty too. Historians still argue whether this medieval superstition had roots in ancient Egyptian beer rituals or was simply a poetic excuse for sloppy storage. Once sealed, the barrels are rolled carefully like sleepy cows into the beer cellar beneath the chapel. It's colder there, lined with smooth stones and aged timber beams that drip when it rains. The air smells like wet wool and hope. This is where the beer matures, deepens, becomes itself. As you light a single taper to check the stoppers, you notice the carvings above the racks. Someone centuries ago etched little symbols into the beams. A fish, a chalice, a loaf of bread, a pair of sandals. The essentials, Margaret says. Later that day, the convent hosts the traders. Once a week, select merchants are allowed through the gates, provided they pay a modest tithe and refrain from blasphemy. Their carts rattle with cloth wax, salt, and soap. In return, they receive food and beer. Yes, beer. The abbess negotiates personally, sharp-eyed and straight-backed, bartering a barrel of mild ale for a sack of dried apricots and 2 wheels of dubious cheese. She inspects the coins with a small magnifying glass and sniffs each sack as if detecting heresy. You're posted at the gate watching the trade unfold, marveling at how your beer is now currency. One merchant, a leathery man with no eyebrows, tries to flirt with Sister Agnes. She threatens him with a ladle. He retreats. The nuns don't sell strong ale to outsiders. That's reserved for the monastery festivals and medicinal use. But the everyday brew that flows freely, even to the children. Yes, even kids drink it. Before you gasp, remember this isn't modern IPA we're talking about. The convent's small beer is closer to liquid bread low in alcohol, rich in nutrients, safer than water, and often sweetened with herbs or fruit peelings. One version tastes like rosemary honey tea, another like sour cabbage and guilt. You prefer the former. There's even a children's rhyme about it. Sister, pour my morning cup not too full and not too up. Warm and brown and soft like sheep, sip it slow, then go to sleep. Margaret swears she learned to sing before she learned to walk, thanks to beer naps. Historians still argue whether children's beer consumption was widespread or restricted to particularly industrious convents. But written records from 12th century Alsace do mention child ale served with porridge. That evening, as the traders depart and the gates close, you help scrub the barrels and tidy the storehouse. The sun sets behind the chapel dome, painting the sky in peach and copper. Then someone calls for evening chores and you're sent to clean the tasting ladles. The brewery's ladles are sacred tools carved from different woods and passed down like relics. Each nun has a favorite. Yours is a stubby elm one with a crack that looks like a rabbit. You polish each gently with sand and vinegar, whispering nonsense as you work. A little superstition never hurts. As you finish, Clara leans in and says, "Want to know the secret ingredient?" You nod, expecting rosemary, maybe lavender. She grins. "Time!" You groan. She laughs. Later in the refectory, you sip a bowl of barley soup and listen to the abbess read aloud from a dusty manuscript about divine harmony. You zone out after the word celestial. Your thoughts wander back to the barrels, the ladles, the taste of hops lingering on your tongue. You're starting to understand brewing isn't just cooking. It's a kind of worship, a ritual of patience, intention, and joy. And in this quiet little convent on the edge of a not-so-silent world, beer isn't indulgence, it's providence. As you drift to sleep that night, the dormitory cool and filled with the sound of slow, rhythmic breathing, you dream of wooden barrels stacked high like a forest, each one humming faintly with life. Somewhere a nun hums, somewhere the beer bubbles on, and in your sleep you smile. Your eyes blink open to dim light the faint creak of ancient beams above you. Somewhere in the convent, a bell sounds low and steady, calling the sisters to prime. You stretch beneath your wool blanket and try to remember what day it is. But days here aren't marked by dates or calendars. They're measured in rhythms: boil, steep, stir, pray, sleep. Today you're headed into the hops garden. Yes, hops. Those tall, viney little flowers that cling and twist like toddlers with separation anxiety. While early beer brewing didn't always rely on hops by the high Middle Ages, certain convents had already begun experimenting with them to improve both flavor and shelf life. Not every order approves some preferred bitter herbs like bog myrtle or yarrow, but your nuns, they're definitely on team hops. You follow Sister Gisela, who leads the hop-tending crew with the enthusiasm of a bee in spring. She carries a small sickle, a wicker basket, and an expression of serene wariness as if the vines might make a run for it. They do try hops or wild things. The garden itself is a curious plot tucked beside the orchard. Tall poles, some carved with saints, some just splintered and tired, stand upright like sentinels. Ropes run between them, and the hop vines reach up greedily thick with tiny green cones that smell faintly of lemon and dust. Gisela shows you how to harvest, gently twisting the cones free and avoiding the sharp leaves. Your fingers get sticky with lupulin yellow powder nestled inside each cone. It clings to your skin and makes your hands smell like a particularly pungent church incense. Don't rub your eyes, Gisela warns. Too late. You spend the next hour blinking like a startled owl while Sister Beatrix cackles behind a wheelbarrow. You're not the first, clearly. As you work, you learn that hops don't just flavor beer, they preserve it. The oils and acids in the cones slow spoilage and fight off unwanted bacteria, which is why hopped ales last longer and travel better. Historians still argue whether hops were introduced into convents via trade routes, or whether some particularly observant nun just noticed that her bitter flower barrels never went sour. One popular theory credits the nuns of Hildegard's own order with pioneering the technique, though no one can agree which exact abbey began the trend. What's certain is that once hops took hold, they never let go literally and figuratively. By midday, your basket overflows. Gisela teaches you to lay the hops out on a drying screen, a simple frame strung with cloth, and set near the smokehouse where gentle warmth dries the cones without scorching them. You sit there for a while watching steam curl through the slats, and suddenly you understand why so many saints are depicted holding herbs. It's not just piety, It's because they spent most of their lives gardening. After lunch, simple oatcakes and a mug of nettle tea, you're back in the brew house. Today is for Groot. Groot is what people use before hops, a blend of bittering herbs, seeds, roots, and sometimes downright suspicious ingredients like henbane or ivy. Some of it was delicious. Some of it could knock you out faster than a sermon delivered in Latin. Luckily, your convent prefers the safer options: yarrow, sweet gale, horehound, wild rosemary. You stand at the long wooden table surrounded by bunches of fragrant greens, while Sister Clara lectures you on ratios. Too much yarrow and your tongue will tingle like it's been slapped. Too much horehound and you'll regret it twice, once now, once tomorrow. She's joking, mostly. The dried herbs are crushed with a mortar, and pestle stirred into the boiling wort and allowed to steep. You watch as the mixture turns cloudy, rich dark. It smells like a garden after rain, and maybe a little like regret. One of the barrels nearby has a Latin inscription on it that roughly translates to "those who sip must also kneel." Clara explains that certain batches are brewed especially for feast days. Stronger, sweeter, with extra spice. These are locked away in the side cellar behind a door that only the abbess and the head brewer can open. You eye it curiously, wondering what holy mischief bubbles behind it. Historians still debate whether this kind of feast beer was genuinely stronger or just more heavily seasoned. Some suggest the nuns used extra grain to boost alcohol content. Others believe they added honey or dried fruit for sweetness and ceremony. You'll probably never know, but you will get a taste eventually. Toward evening, the sisters gather in the cloister with musical instruments. It's not strictly part of the brewing process, but music, you realize, is as much a part of this rhythm as boiling or bottling. Lutes, recorders, psalteries, all slightly out of tune, all beloved. One young novice sings a hymn so softly you feel your chest loosen. You sit beside the herb-drying rack sipping a shallow cup of small beer, your head resting against the cool stone of the cloister wall. The breeze smells of time. Somewhere in the chapel, candles are being lit. And in that moment, everything, the hops, the barley, the boiling, the stirring, the tasting, the laughing, the spilling, the praying, all of it folds together into something strange and lovely. Not just a drink, not just a job, but a ritual, a rhythm, a life. You close your eyes. You are somehow both tired and awake. You are, in short, exactly where you need to be. You're back at it before sunrise. The convent is quiet, its stones still holding the cool breath of night. Even the roosters are too tired to crow, but not you, not today. Because today you're going to bottle. Or more accurately, you're going to barrel. You follow Sister Hiltrude down the corridor to the Cooper's Corner, a small, cluttered area that smells of resin smoke and stubbornness. The coopering tools hang on hooks like relics. Draw knives, crowses, adzes. She lifts one and eyes it like a knight about to challenge a dragon. Then she grins. You try not to look nervous. In medieval times, barrels weren't just containers, they were engineering marvels. Made of staves bound with iron or willow hoops, carefully shaped and charred inside to reduce bacteria. Each barrel is like a little fortress for beer. Waterproof. Durable. Heavy enough to crush your foot if you drop one, which you very nearly do. You roll a cleaned barrel over to the filling bench. Sister Hiltrude inspects your work nods once, then jabs a finger at the spigot. This is the part where we pray it doesn't leak. She's half joking, mostly. You've brewed a dark ale this time. Rich. Earthy. Slightly nutty from the addition of chestnut flour. It flows from the brewing vat in a thick ribbon gurgling into the barrel like it's trying to sing. Historians still argue about the exact alcohol content of these medieval ales. Some say they were low safer than water and meant for hydration. Others point to stronger feast day brews designed to lift the soul and maybe lift you off your feet. The truth is, probably both. Medieval people weren't fools. They knew how to brew strong if they needed to. While the barrel fills you clean, others scrubbing them out with rosemary and ash. The scrub brushes are handmade from bundled reeds, and they smell like every herb in the garden, mashed into a single determined bouquet. The suds sting your hands, your arms ache. You keep going. The thing about brewing, you realize, is that most of it isn't magical. It's repetitive, physical, sticky. It's cleaning things, heating things, waiting for things. It's a lot of almost followed by maybe ending in finally. By midday, the courtyard is full of barrels resting in the shade, each marked with a wax seal. The seals are made from scraps of beeswax dyed with crushed berries or soot. Each color means something different. Mild, strong, medicinal feast day abstinence that one's usually ignored. You sit beside the barrels, your back pressed against the wall, sipping a sample from a clay cup. It's warm, still a bit yeasty, but pleasant. Comforting, familiar. You think about all the places this beer might go. To the abbess's table. To a nearby monastery. To the alms baskets given out on feast days. To a neighbor with a toothache, or a worker patching the convent wall. Or maybe to someone like you, tired, dusty, hopeful. There's a soft knock on the stone arch behind you. It's Sister Miriam. She carries a bundle of parchment and a slight frown. Inventory, she says. You sigh. Of course, every batch must be accounted for. You spend the next hour scratching names and numbers into the ledger. No fancy titles, just dates, barrels, strength usage. A quiet logbook of labor and liquid. And tucked in the corner of the page, a little doodle someone's drawn. A smiley-faced loaf of bread clinking mugs with a jug of ale. No signature, just mischief. Even in a place of silence, jokes find a way. Historians still debate how organized convent record-keeping really was. Some believe nuns like Miriam were hyper-meticulous, tracking everything down to the ounce. Others argue that many convents brewed off the books, especially when trading with nearby villages. As usual, reality likely included both scribes and scoundrels. By late afternoon, you're helping move the barrels into the cooling cellar. It's deep, stone-lined, cool and damp and echoing. You carry the barrels 2 by 2, walking carefully over uneven stairs, passing by shelves stacked with herbs baskets and, oddly enough, some dried pears strung up like holiday garlands. The air smells like patience. You roll the last barrel into place and sit quietly. The candle flickers in the iron holder on the wall. Someone has scratched a tiny fish symbol into the stone beneath your feet. Old, faded, barely there, but still watching. And for a moment you feel it again, that sense of connectedness. That you're not just making beer, you're part of something bigger. A line that stretches backward and forward. One barrel, one loaf, one small act at a time. You head upstairs, wash the yeast from your arms, change into a clean robe. Dinner is lentils and flatbread and quiet gratitude. As the sun sets, you sit on the convent wall and watch the sky shift from gold to lavender. Somewhere behind you, another batch is starting to boil. You breathe deep, the day's work is done, but the story's still brewing. The next morning begins with a scent rich, sweet, a little wild. You follow your nose through the cloister to the herb garden where Sister Cecilia is already up to her elbows in a basket of dried blossoms. She waves you over without looking up. It's infusion day. You blink. Infusion day. She chuckles. It's when we experiment. Today's brew won't be ordinary. No plain barley and hops. This batch will feature additions from the nuns' apothecary things, like lavender, marjoram, dried apples. Maybe a hint of cinnamon bark. This isn't beer for every day. This is special beer herbal ale brewed with the body and soul in mind. You help Cecilia sort through the ingredients, crushing herbs in a stone mortar, measuring with your palm, trusting scent over science. There's no fixed recipe, just tradition, instinct, and bold guesses. Some medieval ales were brewed specifically for health, or so people believed. Ale with rosemary for circulation, with thyme for sore throats, with sage to settle the humors. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were effective medicine or comforting placebos wrapped in bubbles and warmth. But either way, people kept drinking. You heat water in a large cauldron and steep the herbs like tea, watching the liquid turn from pale gold to deep amber. It smells unusual, in a good way, like the ghost of a summer meadow. Sister Cecilia adds cracked barley and starts the mash. You stir slowly, careful not to scorch it. The air fills with a thick herbal steam. You start sweating in earnest. Brewing is not for the dainty, and that's the thing, nuns weren't dainty. They were workers. Tough, practical, focused. They lifted heavy barrels, chopped firewood, managed cellars, tracked inventories. The idea that convents were purely passive places of prayer and lace is a myth. These women were entrepreneurs with rosaries. You finish the herbal mash and strain it carefully through cloth, pressing the mixture to extract every drop. What's left is a pungent reddish wort that smells like bread, and Blossoms got into an argument and somehow made peace. You and Cecilia add the yeast and pour the mixture into a wooden tub to ferment. She slaps a lid over it with a satisfied nod. Now we wait. You wipe your hands on your apron and glance around. The other sisters are preparing lunch. Peeling onions, chopping parsnips, stoking fires. It's busy but calm. Every movement has its place, every roll a rhythm. Later you return to check the fermentation. The mixture bubbles gently, alive, working. Cecilia lets you dip a finger and taste it. It's warm, grassy, just a little sour. Not bad, she mutters, but it needs time. Time is the main ingredient in medieval brewing. Not hops, not yeast. Time, waiting for the mash to steep. The wort to cool. The yeast to bloom. The beer to age. You sit outside and let the sun bake your shoulders as the brew begins its slow transformation inside. You remember stories you've heard about brews flavored with rose petals, even pine needles. Of ales served during childbirth to ease pain. Of beer used in blessings and baptisms. Of monks and nuns toasting feast days with mugs carved from horn or fired clay. You wonder what your herbal ale might be used for? A celebration? A healing? A gift to someone too tired to smile. Historians still debate whether flavored beers like these were common among the lower classes or reserved for nobles and religious houses. Some say herbal ales were survival tools, masking spoilage, repelling pests, or just disguising bad water. Others believe they were spiritual tonics brewed with intention and prayer. Back in the kitchen, Cecilia ties bundles of rosemary and hangs them near the oven to dry. You help her label the finished herbs, each with neat script on strips of birch bark. You take a moment to admire your own hands. They're stained now, with flour, with soot, with wort, but also with something you didn't expect: pride. That evening, as the sun leans low and the bell rings for vespers, you carry a clay cup of yesterday's brew out to the cloister wall. You sit under a fig tree surrounded by shadows and songbirds. The ale is cool now, smooth, slightly floral with a finish like honey and stone. You sip slowly, listening to the sisters sing in the chapel. The world is quiet, but your thoughts are loud. You think about everything it took to reach this moment: dirt, rain, grain, fire, elbow grease, time. A recipe written more in memory than ink. And a group of women long ago and just now turning labor into comfort. You raise your cup to the herbs, to the heat, to the hum of something ancient, and to whatever comes next. By now, you've settled into the rhythm of the abbey, the quiet rustle of veils, the faint clink of pottery, the distant chant echoing like a heartbeat in stone. But today feels a little different. There's a buzz in the kitchen, a low-level flurry of hands and whispers. Someone's coming, a guest, important enough to warrant polishing the pewter mugs and bringing out the good yeast. You follow Sister Agnes to the cellar, cool dim, lined with clay amphorae and barrels sealed in wax. "We need a new cask," she says. "The last one didn't age right." You help her inspect the barrels, tapping the tops, checking the seals. She finally selects one, etched with a single mark, a stylized cross within a barley stalk, the Special Reserve. Brewed 5 seasons ago, saved for feast days or surprise dignitaries. Back in the kitchen, Sister Bertilda is chopping apples with military precision. "He's a bishop," she mutters. "Or a cousin of one. Or he used to be one. Or wants to be. I don't know. Just don't spill anything." You nod solemnly, resisting the urge to giggle. It's oddly comforting, this mix of reverence and dry humor. Everyone cares deeply, but no one is above teasing. The guest arrives near midday, escorted by 2 dust-covered servants and a mule that looks entirely unimpressed. He's older, smiling with that particular air of someone who's used to being listened to, but he bows to the abbess with sincere grace. You like him instantly. The meal is simple but carefully arranged. A lentil and parsley stew, flatbread brushed with oil and herbs, and a modest pitcher of the herbal beer you helped make. Sister Cecilia pours it herself, hands steady. The guest takes a sip, closes his eyes, nods once. "This," he says, "tastes like peace." You exhale. During the meal, the conversation turns surprisingly to brewing. The guest asks about the yeast, the grain, the aging. He even jokes about trying his hand at brewing someday once I'm finished being holy. Sister Agnes mutters, "Don't let the yeast hear that." They'll sour out of spite. Historians still argue how common these moments of casual theological chatter were. Some records describe meals filled with politics and doctrine. Others hint at much more earthly topics, weather harvests. Which batch of beer gave someone hiccups for 3 days? In truth, even the most sacred houses had their ordinary days. Later, you help clear the table and quietly notice the guest has saved the last sip of beer, lingering over it like a memory. You think of the yeast, tiny, invisible, unknowable, and how they've shaped this entire moment. That evening, a small group gathers in the cloister to share what's left of the reserve batch. No ceremony, just quiet gratitude. A few sisters hum an old brewing song, something about barley and blessings and patience. You ask Cecilia if she knows the words. She shrugs, I only remember the last verse. You press, what's the last verse? She grins. It rhymes gruel with jewel. So it's probably not inspired by divine revelation. You sit with her side by side drinking warm beer from clay cups, watching the stars blink awake. She asks if you'll stay on, help with the next brewing cycle. Maybe write down your own notes so the next curious novice has more than faded songs and crooked sketches. You nod. You already knew you would. The sky deepens. A breeze stirs the ivy on the cloister walls. And you think about how something so small, yeast grain time, can build something so big. A meal, a moment, a memory. You take one last sip, savoring the flavor apple time. A hint of smoke and close your eyes. This isn't just history. This is inheritance. You rise early the next morning and the abbey is still cloaked in that pre-dawn hush. Birds not quite singing, fires not yet crackling. The air smells like stone and old wood, and a faint trace of yesterday's brew still clinging to the hearth. You stretch slowly, careful not to disturb the folded veil beside your cot. Sister Bertilda snores gently in the corner. Even holiness, it turns out, wheezes at night. Today you're on cleaning duty, not your favorite, but there's a strange peace to it. The brewery is yours for the morning. No tasks, no guests, just scrubbing barrels and brushing out the spent grain bins. You start with the fermentation crocks. These big-bellied clay vessels are still sticky with yesterday's enthusiasm. You rinse them with warm water laced with thyme and lavender, then leave them upside down to dry on wooden racks. You move carefully. One crack in the clay and weeks of brewing effort spill into the dirt. The floor is dusty and scattered with barley hulls and errant sprigs of rosemary. You sweep it into piles that look vaguely like squirrel nests. There's a rhythm here. Sweep scoop, rinse wipe. It slows your thoughts, grounds you. Your muscles ache, but in that good, just-earned way. You open the door to let in a little breeze, and Sister Cecilia pokes her head in. The new novice wants to learn the boil, she says, but she's afraid of fire. Thought you might be a gentler introduction. You nod and smile. I'll start her with mash. Fire comes later. She disappears again. You hear her cackle before the door even swings shut. The new novice arrives tiny, wide-eyed, clutching a ceramic mug like a holy relic. She introduces herself as Agnes, not to be confused with Big Agnes, Grumpy Agnes, or Old Agnes, who are, you quickly learn, entirely different categories of nun. You show her how to stir the mash without splashing. She's timid at first, but curious. What makes it bubble, she asks. Yeast, you explain. Tiny helpers. She blinks. It's alive. Oh yes, you say, poking the surface. A whole invisible kitchen staff. You tell her the trick about singing to the yeast. Low notes, you say. They like a good hum. Nothing shrill. Historians still debate whether such yeast folklore existed across all abbeys or was more localized oral tradition. Some sources suggest specific melodies were passed down like recipes tied to different brews. Others argue these were merely comforting rituals invented to give structure to the mystery of fermentation. But either way, you like the idea of the yeast having musical preferences. You pause to check a batch you started 2 days ago. It's bubbling nicely, healthy, happy. The surface looks like a gentle stew flecked with bits of cracked grain and a fine froth. You ladle out a bit into a tasting spoon, cool it, and sip. Nutty, sweet, a little wild. You offer a taste to Agnes. She flinches, then sips. Whoa, she says. You grin. That's the yeast dancing. She beams. You set aside the tools, stack the cleaned equipment, and light a small incense cone, a habit now for the bugs in the mood. The smoke curls upward in lazy spirals. It smells like cedar and myrrh and something faintly peppery you can never name. Agnes lingers at the door. Will I ever be allowed to brew on my own? You think for a moment. When you can sing to the yeast and make it rise, yes. She narrows her eyes. That's not helpful. No, you say, but it's true. Later that afternoon, as you pass through the herb garden on your way to the refectory, you spot a small scrap of linen tied around a rosemary bush. A novice's charm protection for the brew. Probably Agnes. You smile. Back in the kitchen, Sister Bertilda is already ladling stew, humming tunelessly. She gives you a knowing look. Did you tell her yeast can sing? I may have implied it. She snorts. That's what they told me too. Dinner is thick with laughter and steam. The stew has too much turnip, but no one complains. You dip your bread in slowly savoring the broth and the chatter around you. One of the elder sisters passes you a folded parchment. On it, sketched in careful charcoal, is a brewing diagram pipes temperatures grain ratios. I thought you'd like to keep the math, she says. You do, you really do. As night falls again, you return to the brewery just to check your starter. It's puffed up slightly soft and airy like it's breathing. You cover it gently, whisper a thank you, and step out into the cooling air. Above, the stars are starting to bloom. The bell for midnight prayers rings softly in the distance, but you're not headed to the chapel just yet. Tonight, you're tending to something a little more bubbly. The fermenting barrels in the brewery wait in the moonlight, quiet and content. You duck through the wooden door lantern in hand, casting a golden halo over the casks. The air is cool and sharp tinged with the familiar scent of steeped grain and earth. It's the kind of smell you could wear like a shawl. You're here for a special batch, the festival brew. It's been fermenting longer than usual, nestled in its corner like a secret. This batch uses a touch of smoked malt and a handful of wildflower honey, rare ingredients saved for feast days. The nuns take their celebrations seriously, even if they don't always admit it out loud. You lift the lid gently. The surface foams like a gentle sea. Not too active, not too flat perfect. You give it a stir with the long paddle, watching the bubbles rise, each one a tiny echo of the work you've put in. Historians still argue whether festival brews followed a strict ecclesiastical formula, or if each abbey experimented based on local customs and what they had on hand. Some monastic records suggest tightly regulated recipes, others hint at more generous spiritual improvisation, especially if the bishop wasn't visiting that week. You lean back against a stone shelf, watching the slow swirl of the brew. It's almost meditative. You think of the novice Agnes and her wide-eyed questions. The way she whispered to the mash like it might answer back. There's something sacred about that kind of curiosity. You pull a sample from the spigot into a clay cup, give it a swirl, and take a slow sip. It's nearly there. Rich, slightly sweet with a smoky afternote that lingers in your throat like memory. You add a touch more honey. Just a whisper. Not enough to overwhelm, just enough to balance. Then you seal the barrel carefully, respectfully, and mark it with a little chalk symbol. A star and a crescent. Your own private code for check me soon. Back outside, the garden is silver with dew. You make your way through the rows of sleeping herbs. The rosemary glows faintly under the moonlight. The mint beds sigh with scent. You pause at the small statue of St. Bridget, near the well patroness of brewers, among other things. She's carved in simple lines, her face serene, her hands forever pouring from a jar. You nod to her, still brewing, you whisper, still trying. You make your way to the scriptorium next, curious to check the old brewing books. The night porter gives you a sleepy blink, then waves you in with his mug of barley tea. The books are lined up like little monks themselves, bound in leather, scarred by fire, thumbed by centuries. You find the one you want, a thin volume filled with smudged ink and faded drawings. Recipes written in Latin with the occasional marginalia scrawled by some long-gone sister. Too sour, one note reads. Add more time, another insists. One page in particular catches your eye. It's a recipe for a medicinal ale meant to soothe sore throats and fevers. It includes ginger, honey, chamomile, and something called night sugar, which you suspect is just poetic branding for molasses. The handwriting is careful, but what charms you most is the little sketch beside it, a nun sneezing into a cup with tiny motion lines drawn from her nose. You chuckle. Health and humor, you murmur, the best medicine. You copy the recipe onto a scrap of parchment and tuck it into your sleeve. By the time you return to your cot, the stars are fading. The sky begins to hint at blue. The candle by your bedside has melted low, You lie down with your hands folded across your chest, not in prayer, but in the kind of calm only a long night's work can bring. Bread might be the Abbey's daily rhythm, but beer is its heartbeat. Both demand patience, both require care, both reward you in the quietest ways. You close your eyes and drift into sleep, already dreaming of the moment when the festival barrel is tapped. The sisters gather round, and someone, probably old Agnes, declares that yes, this one is a keeper. Dawn filters softly through the leaded glass panes of the cloister windows, painting faint rainbows on the cool flagstones. You stretch awake with the ache of contentment, shoulders sore, arms a little stiff, but heart rested. It's festival day. There's a buzz in the kitchen already, the kind of low, excited hum that brews when the oven's warm. The cloisters smell faintly of rosemary and cinnamon. And the bakery's hearth hasn't even cooled from the night before. You slip on your apron with flour still clinging to its folds. No need to look fresh, it's more comforting this way, like a continuation rather than a clean start. The sisters bustle with trays of rye rolls, platters of barley cakes, bowls of chopped apples, and copper kettles filled with herbal teas and weak beer, yes, even at breakfast. Especially today. You check your brew barrel from the night before. It's settled beautifully. You draw a test cup and pass it to Sister Agnes, who nods so vigorously she nearly spills it. That's all the confirmation you need. Outside the courtyard transforms slowly benches dragged into a circle, cloths, spread over stone candles arranged carefully in niches. A garland of dried hops and mint drapes over the arch to the main hall, scenting the air with something green and quietly wild. You help load trays of honey bread brushed with egg, for gloss sprinkled with coriander, and just a dash of salt, sweet and savory, like the Abbey's own personality. Historians still debate the true scope of monastic festivals. Some believe they were austere affairs focused entirely on liturgy. Others argue that behind closed walls, nuns and monks allowed themselves generous meals, songs, and maybe even a little dancing under the right circumstances. Either way, the bread was never neglected. You settle at the table beside Sister Julianne, who offers you a hunk of caraway spiced loaf and a smile like sunlight on wet stone. The children from the village arrive soon after, barefoot and giggling eyes wide at the feast. Everyone eats together. No hierarchy here, not today. You watch a priest try to slice a round loaf with too much enthusiasm. It crumbles into his lap, and the nuns erupt in laughter. Someone fetches another. No one scolds. There's always more. And when the afternoon sun softens the edges of the world, when bellies are full, and songs begin low, gentle, passed mouth to mouth like warm, mulled beer, you feel it. The deep thrum of community. The quiet miracle of something as ordinary as grain turned extraordinary by hands, fire, and time. You stand near the edge of the cloister wall, eyes on the sky. You think of all the mornings, the early risings, the grain hauled and water fetched, the fire coaxed from stubborn ash. You think of the loaves shaped, baked, blessed. The cups filled, emptied, and filled again. And it hits you not like thunder, but like a sigh that none of it is wasted. Even the crumbled crust feeds someone. Even the leftover mash goes to chickens. Even the scorched batch that no one quite liked gets remembered, joked about, written down for future avoidance. Your craft is humble, but never small. It's shared, it's sustained, it matters. As twilight falls and the last tray of bread vanishes, you collect the crumbs with reverence, brushing them into your palm like stardust. You walk them to the garden and scatter them under the fig tree. You don't know who first taught this tradition. Maybe a nun, maybe a baker, maybe no one at all, just something learned by doing, remembered by muscle, passed down like warmth from one loaf to the next. You press your fingers to your apron, your thumb catching the little scorch mark by the seam. It's shaped like a crescent moon. You smile. Tomorrow the rhythm begins again. The light fades gently, now softening the stone walls of the abbey and dimming the glow of candles resting in the alcoves. You sit by the quiet hearth, the fire down to its last golden breath, and let your thoughts settle with the evening hush. The loaves are gone. The barrel's empty. The song has ended. But a warmth lingers not just in your chest or in the soft ache of your hands, but in the memory of everything shared. Bread baked not for glory, but for each other. For the child with dirt on her knees. For the sister who lost sleep in prayer. For the man who laughed too hard and spilled his cup. You are a link in a long, gentle chain of caretakers and keepers. Of flour and fire, of yeast and kindness. of all the quiet things that bind a life together. The abbey breathes in peace. The sky deepens to velvet. Somewhere far off the river murmurs secrets to the reeds. And you baker brewer listener maker, close your eyes and rest. The story sleeps with you.